so a lot of us are very severed from our bodies, right? And we have the idea of sadness, we have the idea of all these things, but we don't really tap into the body to feel it. So a lot of times when I have those clients, it's first of all, it's acknowledging you've done this to survive, right? Like you've had to disconnect from your body because if you were feeling your body all the time, you would have been too overwhelmed to function. So that has been a gift. We don't shame you. There's nothing wrong with you. But if you're coming to me at this point, it's probably because something's shifting and you may be ready to start feeling and you may be ready to let your body drive for a minute, right? And sometimes this happens at 60, right? But at some point you feel like I'm kind of tired of doing like my head doing all the work and actually thinking $500 worth of soup, what does that look like versus what would it feel like?
Norka, welcome to the Way of the Heart. Thank you so much for joining me.
An honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. We shared via email a couple thoughts, and I was telling you that this is the first time that I have a conversation where I don't really have a lot of information about the work exactly, details of the work that you do, how you approach it. We met, well, for the audience, we met, or I really met you, I saw you in a training that we were doing online, a training by Dr. Daniel Siegel. And I just remember really being interested and really resonating with the things that you were sharing. So I wrote down your name during one of those conversations, and I was like, I would love to talk to her. And as I was putting together things for the podcast and I was writing a list of people that I wanted to talk to, I remember and I looked back in that notebook that I was using for that class and I was like, I want to reach out to her. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Me too. I'm really excited.
Amazing. So I usually like to start by learning a little bit more about my guests. So if you would like to share with us, where were you born? How were your young years? Like, how did you grow up? How was that? Whatever you feel like sharing.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I was born in Lima, Peru, last century, I guess now. And I was raised, and I always was like between two worlds. So I came from indigenous people from the north on both my grandmother's side. And they came from like healers and medicine women and people that were very deeply spiritual and tied to, and I know we say plant medicine now, it means like, drugs, but like actual plant medicine where medicine was found in plants, not just hallucinogenics, but actual medicine. So they were raised with those deep beliefs. When they moved to the capital, to Lima, they weren't really allowed to talk about that much to assimilate to what you would call more of a Spanish influenced culture in the capital. So I was raised looking very indigenous, as you can see me, and my family was very white passing. Had like my mom was like blondish with green eyes, my dad was kind of white with green eyes, and my brother somehow looked Asian with green eyes. So I had this experience of like, okay, like I don't really look. I mean, I look like you, but I don't look like you a lot, and I look a lot more indigenous than you. And I went to like a really like wealthy private school. And I had this experience of like being with like really amazing people, but they were super wealthy and we were well off. But it was just like this tug between like where I come and where I am now, and being like this hyper aware child of like, this doesn't feel like my reality. Like I know I was born into this family of means and going to private school and all this stuff, but it almost felt like there's something missing. And it wasn't until I was older that I was told about my heritage and actually explained like, oh, we didn't want to tell you because we didn't want you to be discriminated. And I don't think they had the language when I was little. But reclaiming my heritage was a really empowering process, of like claiming this is where my people come from. Like I'm not from Spain. I mean, I have a little of Spanish, but I'm from here. I'm from this town. I'm from like my grandma comes from the same town where they discovered the Lady of Oscope, no, the Lady of Cao in Ascope, La Libertad. I don't know if
I'm
you've
not
heard about her.
familiar.
Oh, I'm so excited to tell you about her. Okay, so you know how we have like our ruins and we have like our Lord of Sipan, which is like a version of like a really ancient mummy. It's not fair to compare it to Tutankhamun, but some people make that comparison, right? Of like a wealthy tomb mummy kind of like leader. So in the same state, they found on this other side a woman ruler that was buried as kings were, and it kind of made them rewrite their history of women were just not like healers and mothers; they were actually also warriors. So she was buried with like weaponry of like as you would as a warrior. So she was a medicine woman and a warrior, and it kind of made everybody flip their switch on like, okay, hold on, can we start retelling the story then? Because we actually had women warriors and leaders and queens, but more like in that ungendered sense. So that's where my grandma's actually from, which I thought like, that's amazing. How cool. Like, anyway. So rediscovering my roots and where I come from, I'm really getting a lot of pride into like, this is amazing. Like, I wish I would have known this sooner because it would have made more sense than why I felt in between worlds. Um, because I feel like when you just understand it, you can embrace it. And along the lines of Dr. Siegel, like when you understand that, you can integrate it, right? So I integrated all this information of like, oh, then this makes more sense. I am many parts, not just one part. And then I moved here when I was 18, and kind of had kind of like a, traditional immigrant role, just trying to have a better life. I had some family here. Um, Peru was going through a lot of terrorism and like violence at that time. And I had the traditional, like, go work, go try to make things work, put myself through school, fell in love with psychology. And I was very, at that time when I moved here, I was very, very like science based, like none of that spiritual stuff. Like don't, no, if it's not in a, in the doctor's journal or something, and there's no data, there's no research, it's made up. You're scamming me, right? So I've had a lot of those weird pushbacks, and then settling. And so I became a therapist, licensed therapist for the last 12, 13 years. I've been in counseling for 16. And about 3, 4 years ago, I had some health complications from birthing my twins. And it spun me into like a new mental health crisis, right? Like coming close to death and having like the medical system kind of fail you. It's now we know it's called medical traumas, birthing trauma, which I didn't necessarily work with, so I didn't know about. And I was trying to use my traditional psychotherapy tools and my EMDR and all the things that are very evidence based, and it just wasn't working. And I couldn't get out of this doom and gloom feeling, which is depression, right? PTSD. And I reconnected with a therapist I had seen when I went to Peru, who was also a shaman, who I really admired. And I was very much like, I'm only paying you for therapy. Like, don't do any of the other stuff. Like, and she would try to like do the Palo Santo, and I'm like, no, like blowing it, like none of that stuff. And she was very loving and very patient. And I think she saw right through me, that I was just probably scared. And eventually we ended up talking for something. I had to ask her something for a friend. And she gave me a beautiful answer about like some spiritual honoring an ancestor. And then I said like, yeah, that stuff is cool. One day I may want to learn one day. And she's like, I've been waiting for so long for you to tell me you want to learn because you're supposed to learn. So she took me on as like her pupil, and I started learning. I mean, you would technically it would be like Andean Cosmology, but it's like indigenous Peruvians' ways of being, which is very holistic, mind, body, spirit, cosmos. There's a lot of overlap in a humble way with like Native American cultures all over the world. Like a big belief in respecting everything that exists. Like a very peaceful, loving way of being. Like joy is centered. Their pillars of existence, the way they resolve conflict, it just, I don't know, it just learning about that, just doing like a course, which is not really a course, it's a way of living, right? You're like doing this intensive classes, relearning the stuff that I was supposed to already know and probably knew already. That got me out of it. That got me out of the hole. And I was just like, I mean, I couldn't believe it, but I could believe it, right? Like just knowing all that you need to know to integrate it was super healing. And I started then incorporating that into my counseling with the clients that I see that want to. Obviously, I'm not gonna, it's whatever approach you want, but it's worked really well with a lot of like, I see a lot of like high level leaders, like leaders of color, or the ones that are fighting for social justice in those spaces where it's not just like fill a quota, but more like I'm fighting for my people or people I love. And they, I'm seeing really amazing results kind of integrating both. So I'm really excited about being able to move forward this way.
That is an amazing story. So this integration happened recently.
4 years ago?
Okay.
Feels recent.
Okay. Yeah. So I have many questions, and obviously I want to learn everything about it. But of course, we have a certain amount of time that we can cover some of these things. So I want to ask you, where do you want to even begin to share with us some of the teachings, the practices that you have started to implement in both your practice and your life that have really been catalysts for, healing, for change?
Yeah, beautiful. So I'll start with like what I feel. I mean, foundation can be like a 20-hour conversation, but I'll start with like a mini intro, right? So the couple of concepts that I feel settled in my body in this beautiful, like opening heart space way. Um, One was this idea of like pillars. So I know we talk about like pillars of white supremacy or pillars in general as a metaphor for what's a foundation or holds something up. So the four pillars of Andean cosmology, and again, there's many aspects of this. So some people may have five. This is all still tribally kind of kept. So I'm not speaking for all Peruvian people. I'm talking about a very specific group. My teacher comes from the Chipivo Conivo, but she also is inspired by some northern culture. So this is like our blend. But the four pillars being harmony, reciprocity, respect, and love. And it's almost like you can use that as like an assessment, right? So you're going through something, maybe you're struggling with a relationship, you're struggling with a situation, you're struggling with anything, and it's like, okay, step back. What's up with the pillars? Is there reciprocity? Is there harmony? Is there love? Is there respect? And if one of them is missing, okay, then let's work on that. We are not in reciprocity, right? Or there's no respect. How do we get respect? So that felt like a very, not simplistic because it's not simple, but like a deep, authentic way of like, instead of like over analyzing the million things that could have happened for this to not work and maybe gaslight myself into just making it work, to just be like, are the pillars here? And if they're not, how do we get them back? And if we can't get them back, then what boundaries need to be set? Or how do I need to change the way I move my body? And it almost like gives you permission to take action in that way.
And I want to expand a little bit on those pillars, just because I feel like we are so far away from this basic, simple foundations of living a balanced, integrated, harmony or harmonized life, that maybe some of these concepts, like, we don't even know how they look like in a day-to-day basis, right? Like reciprocity, like how does that even look for a human experience? Because I feel like when we think about it, it's more of like nature out there. There's a reciprocity, system. So how would you help us understand these pillars?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, and even just on like we're connecting with like the embodied sense of what does it feel like? I understand as a concept what reciprocity is, but what does it feel like, and what does it feel like when it's not here? And I think that's truly like the strongest tool. So for example, one common, and I see clients individually, I do coaching. So one common thing that I see is like, oh, this person, I don't want to talk to them. Every time they call, they're just like complaining, or it's always trouble. It's like, and then I feel horrible because I know this person needs my help and I want to help, but it's like, oh, I just can't deal with them anymore. Okay, this is a super common situation. I think we all have somebody like that, right? Okay, let's look at the pillar. I mean, this is obviously the reciprocity, but it could be more than that, right? So let's start with reciprocity. Tell me about a time where this relationship was in reciprocity, and what did that look like, and what did it feel like? Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's ever been in reciprocity. Like, what do you mean, right? That's the question. Like, what do you mean? Well, has there been an exchange of not equal gifts, but an exchange of the gifts that are available? Right? So if this is the person that you always help bail out because they don't make enough money, is this also the person that when you're sick shows up at your house and cooks for you? Or the person that shows up and listens when you have, If the person's gift is not money but time, do they gift you their time? And if your gift is time or money but not time, are you gifting that? It doesn't mean that you give money, they give money, that they give soup, you give soup,
Mhm.
right? So that is more like an embodied. Like, well, yeah, I do give her a lot of money, but I make a lot of money, so it doesn't feel like a big effort. But she actually doesn't have a lot of free time, and when I'm sick, she does show up and like helps me clean the house and cooks for me, and that feels like a really big gift. So then you start feeling like, okay, is there reciprocity? Have they never done that anything for you? Well, she gave me her time and attention 10 years ago, and since then it's been me just like boring into this relationship, listening, sending money, doing all this stuff. Okay, well, reciprocity is missing. So we have the issue. Where's the respect? Is there respect? Does this person call and say, hey, I know you're really busy. I have something I really want to talk about. Let me know when there's a good time. Or is it somebody that you answer the phone and start stumping on you, regardless of like what's going on in your life? They may never even ask what's going on with you. Maybe you're like at a funeral and they're telling you about their drama, right?
Mm.
So that could be disrespectful. That could feel like disrespect. Like you don't even know what I'm going through and you're needing things from me, but you're not checking in. That's harmony. So that's, I'm sorry, that's when there's some overlap because that's like no reciprocity and may feel like no respect. And that also may feel like there's no harmony because it's okay to sometimes have conflict. But if every time you're talking to the person, there's conflict, it doesn't even out, right? Versus
Yeah.
like, oh, we have a lot of good times and then we have some stress. But you know what? It still feels like it's kind of balanced. Like there's some stress to some happiness. There brings some joy, brings some stress, right? And then they will say like love is like the force that drives everything, right? Is there love? Is there love in this relationship? And I know in this culture we sexualize love a lot and we sanitize love a lot, but in this culture, love is something that is just given, right? Like they just like my teacher, who I was very bratty about, like, oh, I don't do any of the spiritual stuff. She was like, I love you, and I'm like, that's weird. Like you don't love me, you don't know me. I haven't earned your love, right? And then now I laugh of like, of course you love me because you saw in me yourself, and we are the same. And I love you, and you love me, and it is not sexual, and it's not inappropriate. It's just like, in Spanish we have many words for love that don't mean that they have anything to do with attraction, right? Um, so yeah, so that's kind of like a play of how you would use this to like diagnose and assess.
That is an amazing assessment. As you were talking, I was thinking about multiple things that have happened, especially one example that you gave. Like we literally just like lived through that. My husband was in a funeral and someone was like just like asking for things, like texting, like literally like the example that you gave. So I really I will bring this conversation to my husband because I honestly like I
Please
didn't
do.
know how to respond to him. Um, so having these pillars, I can see
Yes.
now, immediately how honestly like this assessment can really help us.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for explaining how we can use these pillars. And like you said, it feels like it's something very simple, but simple doesn't mean easy, right? Because, of course, I feel like there needs to be, and I think this is something that you incorporate as well in your work, which is mindfulness. There needs to be some type of distance between what we're going through internally, because a lot of these things can be felt very heavy or very big. And there needs to be objectivity, right, to even make
Yes.
this assessment.
Yes.
Um, is there anything that comes up for you as I share this, as far as like, how mindfulness or how any of the approach to actually do this assessment can be navigated?
Yes, absolutely. So what you're saying, it's what I was trying to say at the beginning, but you said it better, right? Like we can overthink. So your husband can sit there and like overthink about like, well, maybe I'm being selfish, or you can like get too much in your head and get away from the fact that this doesn't feel like there's reciprocity.
Mm.
So it's almost like if we spend a lot of energy trying to like come up with scenarios and excuses and gaslight and non gaslight, you're wasting a lot of energy. And that's where like the simplicity comes from, like, oh, this is what it feels like when there's no reciprocity. It feels like resentment. And I'm not a resentful person. So if I feel this, that's because there's no reciprocity. So then what happens when there's no reciprocity? And that's when you come up with your own strategy. Because I also like to tell people like not just what's wrong, but then what do we do about it? And you can actually have this language in this conversation with with the same words. In that moment, if you're at a funeral and someone's calling you and texting you to get stuff, you may be able to answer and be like, hey, at a funeral, unavailable, we'll reach later. Or you may be such a mess that you don't have it in you and you just don't answer and you turn off your phone because you're like in deep grief and you need to be present for grief, right? We can't numb out of grief. Um, but then it will still circle back to, hey, now that I have energy, I would like to have a conversation with you. And based on what type of person you are, if you're old school, you may want to go get a coffee and have the conversation of like, these are the 4 pillars that I'm trying to have in my life. And there are times where I feel like reciprocity is not there. And I'm curious if this is something you would like to work with me to improve this relationship. And if they go, I haven't even thought about it, let's explore. Awesome. Come on this journey. And if they go, if they darble you, like, how dare you? I've always done everything for you. And like, you failed me and, reverse attack victim offender, which is sadly common. Then, that person cannot engage in reciprocity and cannot have a strong foundation. And then you may have to make a different decision about the relationship. You may have to decrease the time or find ways to be like, okay, well, you give me one, so I'm going to just give you one back. If I want to keep you, maybe I'll give you a 2. But I can't be giving you a 10 when you give me a 1, because then I get resentful when lack of reciprocity is there. And I don't like being resentful. That's not who I am. Then I'm off my own harmony.
That's amazing. That is amazing. I'm loving learning about this because there are so many things that I'm like connecting dots with. So let's talk about another teaching lesson, unless there's anything else that you want to share there, which I'm sure we can even extend in every single one. Respect and harmony, we can definitely extend on that. So unless you want to share anything there that comes to you that you feel called to share, or if there is something else, another teaching, another type of integration that you have applied in your practice, weaving, these traditional teachings from your lineage.
Yeah. The one thing I would add to, though, for this before we transition is that this is what it feels like to you, right? So this is not like an objective, like, again, somebody can be pouring a lot of money to somebody, but they value more the soup that they get, or the person that shows up and cleans their home because they're sick. So this is more like a feeling of what feels like reciprocity. There's not like a formula where, well, I give you $500, so I need $500 worth of soup, right? This is more like what it feels like. So I would just say that, because then we're really good at gaslighting or letting other people gaslight us into it's the same effort or not.
Yeah. So something is actually coming to me before we transition, and it's actually something that I shared a video on my YouTube channel this week, and I just recorded one today about emotions and getting familiar with our sensations, with emotions, with feelings. So how do you work with your patients that maybe are not even familiar with their feelings, that immediately they rationalize, right? Like what you said before, like there's immediately like overthinking, there's immediately analyzing whatever is felt. How do you work with sensations and emotions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of us are very severed from our bodies, right? And we have the idea of sadness, we have the idea of all these things, but we don't really tap into the body to feel it. So a lot of times when I have those clients, it's first of all, it's acknowledging you've done this to survive, right? Like you've had to disconnect from your body, because if you were feeling your body all the time, you would have been too overwhelmed to function. So that has been a gift. We don't shame you. There's nothing wrong with you. But if you're coming to me at this point, it's probably because something's shifting and you may be ready to start feeling, and you may be ready to let your body drive for a minute, right? And sometimes this happens at 60, right? But at some point you feel like, I'm kind of tired of doing, like, my head doing all the work and actually thinking $500 worth of soup, what does that look like versus what would it feel like? So I usually start with like, what does your body literally feel? I don't even go into like emotions, right? It's just like, do you feel pressure? Does it feel tight? Does it feel expansive? Does it feel cold? Does it feel sharp? To just help them identify constriction versus expansion. So that would be like step number one. I don't even like, let's not even overthink if it's humiliation versus embarrassment, right? Like, does it feel like you're open and you can breathe and your lungs are expanding and your chest is opening? Or does it feel like you're tight and squeezing and something's heavy? And then we may expand to, okay, so when you feel like there's like a black hole in your chest, you know that is, let's say, grief. Awesome. But that may be a map that each person does, and there's some commonalities which align with like Chinese medicine, right? Like usually grief maybe in the lungs, but there's also some difference where everybody has like their different experience. The one that I find the coolest that I've seen enough, I don't have data for this, but I've seen so often, it's most people will have like in their gut, they'll have anxiety, butterflies, and fear really close to each other, and learning to differentiate those. So we're not excited about the person that makes us fear, like afraid. And we know that anxiety is not the person that gives us butterflies. I think those have been really like liberating when I teach people like to make the difference of like, let's pinpoint. Like if they're that close, let's do like the one dot on each spot so you know what your body's actually saying.
And this, I am assuming, is very individual, right? There's nothing that you would say, this is a good sign that it is not excitement, it's actually fear.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you think about it, right? Once you connect to it, you're like, oh my God, that's absolutely like anxiety. I'm anxious because this person that I'm dating is very unstable and unpredictable. It's not butterflies. But at the beginning, before we connect with our bodies, like, oh, I'm feeling butterflies, kind of, because it's the area and you're disconnected and severed. You're not in a relation, so you're not really getting the signals right.
Mm. That is, once again, a reminder why it's so important to cultivate these practices, to connect with our emotions. Is there a specific practice that you personally have in your life where you give your time to really connect with the emotion?
Yeah. Yeah, I have lots of practices, but I would say for someone that is resonating with like, I am a severed floating head, like I don't know what anything feels like. I would say the first exercise that I would just have you take like a baby step is on a piece of paper, draw like a little shape of a body and, turn off your electronics, put something that smells good and do some deep breathing and then start recalling memories that would elicit the emotion you're trying to map out. So basically you do a body map. So think about like your earliest memories of feeling fear. And then, okay, and run it. I mean, this is kind of hard, but it's still like an intro because we have to map it, right? And feel the feelings and replay this as a movie in your head until something in your body tweaks or pushes or moves. And then map that. And then, draw out the emotions you want to map. So usually it's like the happy, joy, fear, anxiety. If you really struggle with like insecurity, map out insecurity. And if you feel like a lot of people have some stuff similarly close, draw another memory to really like further pinpoint it's exactly here, not there. And, draw another memory. And then once you have your map, then it's your cheat sheet. Like you're having dinner with someone and you feel the spot. Oh, but that's anxiety. That's not excitement. So I should probably check my pillars, what's missing here, and then make a decision.
That is a beautiful practice. That is incredible. Uh, I think that, I saw today, I don't know if you're familiar with Nicole Lopera. I'm maybe her last name. She's the holistic psychologist and on social media, on Instagram. And she posted something about emotions that said something along the lines as teaching emotional regulation is, oh gosh, I actually saved the picture. I want to say it correctly,
Yeah, I want to
because it
hear.
was so beautiful, and I think this is why it's so important for us to really have this connection and this understanding of our emotions, because the work really begins there, right? Like we are even talking about this because to be able to assess with these pillars, we have to recognize how it feels in the body and not overthink and not overanalyze, right?
And can you really regulate if there's a pillar missing? Like, my
Mm.
nervous system should not feel safe if I'm not safe. So I think a lot
Mm.
of times we're like, oh, your nervous system, you got to learn to regulate it. Yeah, yeah. But for my nervous system to be safe enough to be regulated, there has to be safety. And if one of these pillars is missing, maybe there's no safety here. Maybe my nervous system is right by being activated. And that activation is for me to like maybe leave,
That is
right? Or
amazing. That is an amazing observation there. I I recently shared a video about emotional resilience, which somehow, maybe this is from Dr. Daniel Siegel's work, but emotional resilience, I resonate with that concept more than regulation, because I think regulation implies what you're saying, that it's almost like there always needs to be calm, or calmness, I should say. Emotional resilience to me is really being able to strengthen our my capacity to hold any emotion, right? To
yes,
be with any emotion.
yes,
And then from that, I can gain a lot of insight, like you're saying. Like, I can recognize maybe there is no safety. Maybe there needs to be an action that needs to be taken. But either way, I really would love to share this with you, because I think this is exactly, like what you're doing with the work that you do, helping people connect with that. And she says, teaching people how to regulate their emotions is crime prevention, it's addiction prevention, it's the path to a world where people can disagree and still respect each other. And I thought that was like so beautiful, because I feel like just now, I mean, I'm 34. I'm getting to that place where I forget. I'm 34, and I think for the most part, people my age, and older, of course, we haven't had the tools to connect with our emotions, to deal with our emotions. And if we really look into a lot of the conflicts that we have in the world, and the differences, and yeah, like the conflict, many of these things could be worked through if we are familiar with what's happening with our internal world. And then through people like you, with the work that you do, gain the language, gain the insights to know how to communicate that. And then in that process, we also recognize that I want to feel safety, and I know or understand that because you want to feel safety too, this is how you're acting. So understanding that we even have the same North Star, it's an amazing place to have this type of conversations.
yeah, I love that. I think you're segueing to something that I usually talk about, which is conflict. And again, the disclaimer that this is mixed between indigenous Peruvian theories and like my psychotherapy. So there's a twist in there. It's not as pure. So conflict is a great one. One of my most favorite lessons was, or chapters of lessons, however you want to call it. It's all oral story, right? It's one-on-one teaching, mentorship, but it was conflict under Andean cosmology, and you have to almost backtrack with the reminder of before colonization, there was like a respect for sacredness. So the earth was sacred, Mother Nature was like sacred, the stars were sacred, everything was sacred, right? Like everything that was created by Creator is sacred. And there's some different names for what they would call Creator based on what people you're from, but it's still Creator, right? It can be the sun, it can be the moon, it can be, well, not the moon. It's like the sun, or it's Earth, or like there's a lot of mothers, like ocean's mother, fire's mother, wind is father, sun is father. There's a lot of like very beautiful masculine energy, feminine energy, and not necessarily like gendered, because you can have both energies of, you should have a balance of sacred feminine and sacred masculine, and if you can't achieve it, you should surround yourself with people that help you balance your energy out. But one was conflict. So the foundation that this, in theory, was not a sexist society, as we would use the word sexism now. So the things that women did were honored as their gifts, and then the things men did were honored for their gifts. So nothing was better or worse. They appreciated each other based on the contributions they had. Um, and that's something they have to keep reminding me, because sometimes I'm like, explain to me again how you get respect to just staying at home and cleaning, because or for like the elderly were taken care of, and they would like do whatever they did. Remind me again how they respected everyone, which is sad that that's what our brains are so far away from that time. um, but because they respected each other so much, And because one of their main goals in life was to learn the most they could about the universe, because universe is God, the earth is God, knowledge is a gift, right? The more you get to know your God, the better life you have. So when they encounter conflict, it was like an exciting opportunity because they would figure, well, there's a blind spot. If you and I disagree and I love and respect you, and not love just sexual love, but love as communal love, then either you have a blind spot, or I have a blind spot, or we both have a blind spot. And through talking to each other, we can piece together what's missing and what's allowing us to have a different point of view. But the foundation of this was that I respect your opinion. And I understand, if I think it's not that you're wrong, but you may not be seeing what I'm seeing, and I may not be seeing what you're seeing. And either one of us or both of us could be wrong. So then it's more
Mm.
like an expansion theory of knowledge, of like, we disagree. Okay, I want to understand everything you see, right? Kind of like you're driving. What do you see on your mirror? Describe everything. Okay, and then I'll describe what I'm seeing on mine. Where's the overlap or where's the gap? And that really blew my mind, especially because I do couples counseling too. And to be like, that sounds like a way better way of doing conflict than what we've been doing, you know?
It sounds to me almost like empathy in action. Like, we have this idea, I have this idea of empathy as almost like putting yourself in other person's shoes. It's not necessarily exactly that, but like that idea, so that I
Mm-hmm.
can understand your perspective, your world. But I think, for me at least, that idea of empathy really only lives within me. I'm individually kind of like thinking about that and using my imagination. I usually like to bring my creative world, because I've always been very creative and artistic. And I like to use that energy that flows through me of creativity to and apply it towards my relationships, and not even relationships, just like, the connection that I have with people, even people that I don't know, using that imagination to think, well, how is your world? Why do you even feel or think about this way? And what must have happened, maybe? But this takes it to another level, right? It's actually taking action on that. And I feel like a lot of times, or at least for me, and the reason why I don't, of course we have a lot of conditioning, and like the way that I've been raised does not include having a conversation about this type of conflict. But really, one of the reasons is because that is the foundation of our culture, right? It's not something that is common to actually talk about conflict. It's more like we separate ourselves from conflict. I try to ignore you. I try to not, relate to you anymore, because obviously we are disagreeing. And maybe sometimes that is healthy. What would you say? Like, is that always health, or is there always a way to really talk about it?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think I struggle with that, especially when we talk about the polarization of like politics and some of the extreme views that some people in this country have. You wonder, sometimes you have to set a boundary because there's no pillars, and sometimes there are the pillars, and you can have this conversation with that person. But at least in like the Lima culture in Peru that I grew up, you could be really good friends with people that disagreed with you, and somehow it worked. Now, I the disagreement wasn't about your humanity, which makes it easier, right? But so I think that's kind of where the line is. If you disagree about something that would make me less human, then I'm there. Then there's no respect, and there's no love, and there's probably not reciprocity. So I probably cannot be in relation with you. But if we have those foundations, if we and then agree to have this conversation, I have friends that are like very feminist that are married to guys that are kind of like machistas, and somehow they are like happily married, and they've talked about it, and they just agree to disagree, and she does whatever she wants in the sense that you can have your beliefs, but it's not going to affect how I move my body, and then it's kind of vice versa too. Um, so I've seen it work, and it still kind of blows my mind a little, but people do it.
Yeah, I I'm thinking again about my husband. I guess I'm really thinking about my husband today, because we actually disagree in a lot of things, like spirituality, for example. He was raised Christian, and I was raised agnostic, and recently I really got into spirituality and to really exploring it. And I definitely see it from a more mystical perspective, we can call it. So that is very different for him, right? The way
Mhm.
that my concept of God, for example, differs from his concept of God. And some of my favorite conversations have been about those topics with him. And now that I'm thinking about it, is really applying what you're saying. Is really talking about like, okay, so what do you see here? And both of us have had so many aha moments in the realization that we're actually talking about the same thing, just using different words, right? Like a lot of times is just a lack of resonance in the actual words that we're using, which is amazing, right? Because that really tells you that sitting with someone and taking the time to really listen can bring so much insight.
As long as you have the four pillars, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because yeah, if I
Yeah.
think about it, um, my relationship with him really, it's all about those four pillars.
Yes.
And it's and even more like to what you were saying before, it's really more about the feeling, the sensation that I have.
Yes.
um it feels like all of those things are definitely holding the foundation of the relationship.
Yeah. One of the funny things when you talk about more like even science people or other religious people about spiritual beliefs, at least since in the Andean cosmology, you can replace the word God for their God. Like they are very strict. This is not a religion, right? This is maybe it's a philosophy, but it's more like a way of being. It's a way of moving in the body. And the more we learn about quantum physics and all these new studies that are confirming like literally Mother Earth, it's like our mother because it births us. And like this is all, it sounds spiritual, but it's also like very like literal. Like we can't live without like earth. We need this earth, we need water, which is also mother, we need sun. These are things that are birthing us and taking us back when we're done. And like, you know, the nature having spirit, it's like, well, now there's research saying that plants have intelligence and they communicate with each other. And myelin or mycelium is like this ancestral network of like, well, it's, you're saying the same thing that we've been saying 10,000 years ago, but you now have little data. And my teacher thinks it's funny when I'm like, oh, there's new data. And she's like, yeah, we know that for like, we know this for a long time. I've been telling you this. Right. So it's exciting to now have more of the data language where it's like, I know it sounds like I'm being spiritual, but I'm being literal. Like there's research in which plants communicate with each other and like have like a database of knowledge, just like your cells do. Right.
Yeah,
Or like we're made out of stardust. Like it sounds spiritual, but it's literal.
yeah. I've talked about that a lot because through the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel, I've mentioned this before. I don't know if I even said it to him. I don't think I said this during our class, but a lot of times when I hear him talk, I don't hear a doctor, a science
Mm.
based person. I hear, or it lands in my heart as like a spiritual teacher is talking. And I have found that through learning through this data, right? Because also like somehow for me the acknowledgement of like this data, like you said at the beginning, it has helped us understand and integrate. So it has really helped me appreciate science and, you know, all of the findings through research to even appreciate more my spirituality, right? Because it's so beautiful. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I feel it. Like I don't truly need you know, a research to show me what I feel, but there's something that our mind really kind of like feels good to have validation of some of these topics. And
Our left
there
brain.
was yeah, there was something about time that I remember during the one of your shares in that training that I was fascinated with. I don't know if maybe you can even recall it or if you know what I'm talking about,
Time
but
being
it was
circular.
yes, yes. I
Yeah.
found that fascinating almost to the point that I don't even remember. I just remember my reaction to it. Can you share that with us? Like, what is the concept of
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, so it was, remember he was talking about his research based idea of how we're never really in the present because our brains are primed to use past data to scan for the future. So we're not really in the moment. And that's why we advocate so much for mindfulness, right? But that's our default. Um, and I think that was controversial that for him there's no time. There's just the way our brain is processing data. So in some indigenous cultures in Peru, they believe time is actually circular and you're standing in place and it moves to where like the present is the future's right behind you. You're in the moment and what you can see ahead of you is the past. So it moves kind of like this. So we focus so much on the past because that's visually what's in front of us. That's what's just past, and we can see it for a while before it goes to turn around. And our future's kind of right behind. So the one thing they'll say is like, oh, the future is just running a little behind. It's not here yet. So they see it completely backwards. And then healers, what you would call shamans, are actually able to travel this wheel. They're not stationary, that there's ways through journey and not just plant based, not hallucinogenics, but other ways they can actually travel and see um, as needed. And they can see beyond like the plateaus of the reality that we can see. They can actually go to down to the level of all knowing. So they actually are not static, they can move around, but most of us can't.
That is incredible. Um, I'm thinking about the heart, obviously, because this is the Way of the Heart podcast. Are there any teachings that are specifically around the heart, whether it's, the organ or the concept, the poetic concept in these traditions?
Yeah, so the concept of the most beautiful. So we have the pillars, but there's also like other theories, right? And one of it is the concept of reciprocity and love, of this being love being the force, so heart, love being the force that runs the whole universe, and that it's the most untapped resource that we have. That we tend to ridiculize when we are in love, or when we love things, we feel it's immature, childish, and a lot of like really like wise elders will be childlike. They will love intensely, they'll have joy intensely. And they talk about true wisdom comes with an opening of the heart. So it'll be the ones that are joking with each other and they're all wise, and you meet them and they're like, oh my God, this person like holds legit the knowledge of the universe, and they're like laughing and joking around and being silly and finding ways to just be happy and be like loving towards other people, and you genuinely feel like they're loving presence. They may just meet you and they love you. They're happy you're there. They treat you like family, and that alone just vibrates in a way that feels so healing. And I know that sounds spiritual, but we're also talking about like physically, like vibrations can, we're all mostly water, right? So we're influenced by other people's vibration.
Yeah. Are there any practices that help us connect or open that heart space in the
Yeah.
in the Andean tradition? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many. I mean, it's mostly like it's like a lived practice though. It's like your heart should be open for the most part. So they would say it's not you practice to open. It's like you have it open all the time. Which seems very risky because then you get hurt, right? And then they would say things like, what does that even mean? Like, if you're scanning for your pillars and you get hurt, you set a boundary and then your heart will heal because love is this like untapped resource of eternal creation.
So it really is the heart is I have defined the heart as the doorway towards this cosmic intelligence, right? It's like it really is how we open the door and life flows through that. Um
Mhm.
so I definitely connect with these teachings for sure. So, as we wrap it up, I've loved everything that you have shared with us. I feel like everything is very practical as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to share that comes to you that you have found that maybe with your patients has been very helpful? Of course, besides the pillars, but is there anything that
Yeah.
comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to make sure that I gave you a general answer to the hard thing, but I didn't give you a specific answer. So I will give you a specific answer because I wasn't at the place where I could just like open my heart and love everyone because I was not there. I was more like there's a vault and there's a brick wall and there's a steel
Mm,
wall, right? So I would say for someone that has no idea what an open heart feels like, go back to the idea of expansion feeling versus contraction feeling, like constrictions, the tightness, the lack of air versus the expansive, the breath, the openness. So it's going to be towards the openness one. And then the other thing would be, and I think we all know this if we truly like think about it, what close to your heart? Because we start with an open heart, right? When we're kids, our heart is open. We love everything and everything hurts, right? We cry a lot because our heart gets hurt a lot, right? And then we start closing, shutting down sections of your heart with have it be trauma or loss or repeated systemic something. So if you truly feel like I don't even know where my heart is at, I would say, can I go back to like when was it open? And when did it start shutting and how far did it shut down? And then when have you experienced reopening of your heart? Right? So sometimes when we fall in love, a piece of our heart opens. Or like I know with I adopted a dog 6 years ago, and parts of my heart that were closed from trauma, it was impossible to keep them closed. Like experiencing unconditional love from a pet just pushed right through my barriers. Right? So find what locked it up, what has worked to open it. And if it's nothing, then think about ways that you can reopen it and consent. Because if you think about it, as much as pain hurts us, the risk of living a life when we're not embodying and connecting to like one of the biggest resources that are around, which is love, I think that's riskier than just like, oh, my heart's broken because this person betrayed me. Okay, talk. Are the pillars there? Yes. Okay, work on it. Are they not there? Okay, maybe set a boundary and then move on. Keep your open heart. Remove the environment that's hurting it. Don't punish your heart for the environment not being safe. Either change the environment if you can, or move yourself to a different environment if you can.
mm. That was a beautiful answer to that. Thank you so much. Norka, what do you think the world needs the most right now?
To connect to their body and feel their feelings and be messy for a while. Because when you start doing this work, you're going to be messy and you're going to cry and it's going to feel weird. You're not going to be an autopilot. You cannot, if you're an autopilot, you're not doing this right. So get messy, get to know your body. Don't shame yourself for feeling what you feel. Everybody feels like, I'm too sensitive. Well, be too sensitive. Who cares? Just be sensitive and have your pillars and work with people that want to be kind about your sensitivities. And I'm glad you're sensitive because we're in a system that has wanted us to be numb for 500 plus years. So amazing that you're still feeling and it's still, you're still human. Like that's resilience. And the other piece would be to have conversations with people that you really love to be like, do you want to do this with me? Like, I want to live a life where my heart is open. Do you want to try this with me? Do you want to check in? Do we want to go get coffee once a month and talk about how this is going and where's your heart and where do you leave reciprocity? Um, and I think the last one is really trying to make this not just the thing that you practice like a little bit, but more like how can I transition my default to be an open heart living by setting boundaries, by doing the pillars, by bringing people into your community with these changes, so you don't need to have so much protection, right? With the environment, it's already protected and protective of you.
Mm. Thank you so much, Norka, for your wisdom. And I want to go back and listen. I will do it because I will edit this conversation, but there are so many things that I loved about what you shared. I am so grateful that you joined me in the way of the heart. And where can people find you if they want to work with you, witness you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my website is my name, norkaayllon.com. So hopefully maybe you can link it somewhere because the spelling is hard. NORKAAYLLON.com. And yeah, I do coaching. I do therapy here in Colorado. I do a bunch of trainings. I travel for like nonprofits and corporations to actually, I've been actually teaching this in organizations to prevent burnout because everybody's burning out. Our lives are not sustainable anymore. So there's a lot of people that are investing on going back to old ways of existing and investing on teaching their employees how to do this so they can actually be happier. And the results are really amazing. So I believe in it. It worked for me and it works for a lot of people.
I believe in it 100% as well. Thank you so much, Norka.
Thank you.
I I really hope that we stay in contact because I would love to learn more from you. And of course, my way to practice reciprocity, anything that you need that that I can help with, I'm here. So thank you so much. And
Thank you so
for
much.
everyone listening, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. There were so many nuggets, like golden nuggets. If you think anyone can benefit from this conversation, please share with more people. And yeah, leave us any comments if you have any questions. Thank you so much for being with us.